Hi, Tantus Navran Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, welcome! Today is continuing discussion on Shadowrun, the 4th edition of it. Today I'm going to get into talking about vehicles. I'm getting into talking about, of course, vehicle combat and some of the basic statistics of vehicles. So let's dive into it. Let's talk about vehicle combat. Now there are two types of vehicle combat you will get involved in. There's tactical vehicle combat and chase vehicle combat. Tactical vehicle combat is going to imply that something more like that people are the more important portion of it. That might be you fighting a drone, or someone in a vehicle like riding around circles, a bunch of people. It's involving people on the more side and more fighting against that vehicle in particular. Chase combat, on the other hand, is a lot more dynamic. It's based around more maneuverability rather than positioning. It's effectively talking about a chase scene where people are maneuvering back and forth against each other and the battle is going that way. That's a lot more longer involved, and it's more distance and time consuming. So tactical vehicle combat will be more like normal combat. Chase vehicle combat is going to be more of an extended scene you're going to be having. So when we're talking about vehicle combat, we have to talk about the basic statistics of a vehicle. So vehicles will have initiative. If someone is controlling a drone or a vehicle directly, then it's going to be that person's initiative when the vehicle will act. If someone is controlling it through full immersion VR, then that person will use their matrix initiative for determining the vehicle's initiative. If no one is controlling it and you have the drone on autopilot or the vehicle on autopilot, it's going to use the vehicle's pilot plus response as its initiative, and it will have 3 initiative passes. So in many circumstances, a vehicle will have the same initiative as a player, but there is times when if you're having it do stuff on its own, it has its own initiative. Now, a vehicle will have body. It works just the same as the body of any other player. It's what's used for soaking, for determining health, and that's when we get into the condition track. A vehicle has a condition track. It does not have a stun track. It only has the physical track. And it's determined the exact same way a player's is. 8 plus half the body rounded up. So if your vehicle had a body of 3, it would have 10 levels of health. Now, a vehicle will also have armor. The armor functions like both types of armor. It's both ballistic and impact at the same time. If the DV of an attack does not exceed the armor of a vehicle, because the armor of a vehicle could be much higher than anything a character could have, then it does no damage. It effectively does not hit. If you're only doing an attack that would do 3 damage and the armor value of a vehicle is 4, you're not doing anything to it. So a vehicle will often have a pilot rating. This represents the sort of dog brain AI that a vehicle, a drone or another kind of vehicle, would have. It represents the general intelligence or the general sort of intellect. What it really represents is any time a vehicle would have to make a test, it would substitute most of its attributes for the pilot rating. Now again, it would have to have some kind of skill soft installed for it to roll many of these skills, but it would at least have the attributes based upon its pilot rating. Now vehicles will have a handling. This represents the difficulty or ease of using that vehicle. It represents is either a penalty or a bonus to your roll when rolling a vehicle skill-based test. There's a chart that tells you the general example of types of vehicle and what their handling would be. Now many vehicles, most in fact, have a sensor rating. It would only not have a sensor rating if it's a very classic older car, or if it's been modified and the sensors have been removed. Effectively, the sensor rating is the intuition of a vehicle. If you're in a vehicle using it, you can either use your intuition or the vehicle sensors when you're making a check. Like if you're making perception and the vehicle sensors are better than your intuition, you can use that. On the other hand, the vehicle itself is making a sensor test. If it's using its pilot, it would use its sensor rating the same way as we would use our intuition. Either way works fine. The sensors, though, represent the intuition for the vehicle. Now, a vehicle's acceleration is represented by 2 numbers with a slash line in it. To the left of the slash line is effectively what the vehicle's walking rating is. And so if you're using the walking rules, that's what it would be. To the right of it is its running rate. That will tell you how far it would go in a running sort of action on a turn. Now, the vehicle's speed represents its maximum velocity it can take. A vehicle can exceed this speed, but the handling starts to tank out, there becomes problems, it becomes harder to control. It becomes more of a challenge once you exceed this speed because the vehicle is not made to exceed that speed. It can, it just is not made to do it safely. So let's start talking about a vehicle test, because this is very important in any kind of vehicle combat, regardless of the type. It's your check to control a vehicle. It's going to be your reaction, plus your whatever appropriate piloting skill it is, plus whatever modifier the handling would be, whether it's a positive or negative. And you would roll that test. Now, on average, you don't have to make a vehicle test for everything. If I'm just driving around the city, I don't have to make tests. You make tests when there's extreme circumstances that could cause you to crash, or when you need to maneuver. Those sort of times is when you do it. Tests can range from just needing one success, or they can have a threshold of multiple successes that you would need. The book gives some examples of different thresholds. Assume that 3 or 4 might be average for very difficult maneuvers or for avoiding things like crashes. Let's say like you turn a corner, you manage to get around, and all of a sudden there's something there that you have to maneuver out of the way. It might be a threshold of 4 in order to avoid that and not hit into it. Granted, if you are not successful, it does not necessarily mean you crash, depending on the circumstances. If you're making a test to avoid a crash, then yeah, you're crashing. But if you're making a test for maneuverability, just because you fail doesn't mean you will necessarily crash. It just means that you're not in the circumstance, you didn't succeed at the circumstances that you needed to, and it might leave you in a poor situation in general. Now, if you're piloting with augmented reality, you get +1 to your dice pool test on your vehicle tests. If you're using full immersion, on the other hand, you have -1 to the threshold of any vehicle-related test. So you don't get that +1, but instead, all of your thresholds are 1 less. So if there's a threshold that would have just been 1, you automatically do it when you're piloting in VR. On the other hand, if it's something that was 4, now it's 3. That does make a big difference. If you glitch on a test, you're, again, not automatically crashing, but what it might do is, again, put you in a disadvantaged situation, might make it that things are jostling around the vehicle so that if anybody else in the vehicle is attempting to make tests, they would have a penalty of -2, something like that. A critical glitch would mean you would crash. That's effectively what it would be. Vehicle tests can be modified by the terrain you're in. The terrain can increase the threshold of any kind of maneuvers you're doing. That's effectively what it does. So more difficult the terrain, the higher the threshold increases by, to make it much more difficult to do maneuvers in said terrain. This does not include weather and visibility, which also may alter whatever checks you get. They can add penalties too, depending on the circumstances. If you're in a fine city street, middle of the day with no bad weather, where it's nice and bright out, you're just going to have a normal roll. On the other hand, if you're driving off-road late at night where it's dark out in the blinding, in like a horrible storm, you're probably going to have some penalties to your dice pool, and the threshold's probably going to be really ridiculous. So that's it for today. I went over some of the basics of vehicles. I talked about the types of vehicle combats. I talked about the attributes of a vehicle, which are very important for understanding what you need to roll, how a vehicle reacts as a character in whatever combat it is in, and I talked about the basics of the driving test, the dice roll you're going to have to do for using vehicles. Next time I'm going to get into talking about both tactical combat and the chase combat as part of vehicle combat. So, if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, subscribe. It shows your support for the channel, for the Empire, for the work I do. And until the next time, I bid you farewell.